Hey, it's me, Rob Ryan. We're back with another incredible episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers. Today's guest, Melanie Jones, is a fascinating personal story. But what we focused our conversation on is the new business that she's building around a training content program around the chief of staff role in today's ever-changing business landscape. And so if you are an executive inside of a corporation, or you're a visionary leader, entrepreneur, if you're a solo entrepreneur building your own kind of brand company, you probably have thought of or come across this idea of like chiefs of staff as valued right-hand operational people in whatever you're building. And I got to tell you, like, if you're interested or fascinated or curious or uninformed about this topic in today's business hiring landscape, you want to enjoy this episode with Melanie and myself. Melanie has an incredible career track record herself. She rose to prominence and experientially has shined working with one of the more prominent, famous storytellers and investors in the U.S. right now, Arlan Hamilton at the ArlanWasHere Company. And Melanie is bringing all of that to her day work, but also to her work building now this Elevation Chief of Staff certification training program content. So you're going to want to check this out. It was a blast. She brings great energy. We have a huge natural rapport. And honestly, it was just a wonderful, wonderful way to add value to my day today. So I hope you enjoyed as much as we did making it. Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, and welcome back or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers, the show where I get the pleasure of having weekly conversations with some of the brightest and most interesting entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors and segments of our society today. And today, I'm super excited to be joined by my online friend, Melanie Jones, who's joining us from Austin, Texas. But before we get to Melanie, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit more about her so you can understand kind of some context on what we're going to be talking about today. So Melanie is the CEO of the brand company ArlanWasHere. And more importantly, and what we're going to talk about today a lot, is she's also the founder of a new certification program company called Elevation Chief of Staff Training. She's a trailblazing operator who has taken every bit of her own career experience to advance from executive assistant to project and account management to director of customer success, chief of staff, and again, now CEO of this kind of multi-million-dollar media company and founder in her own right now herself. Melanie and her work at Backstage Capital and ArlanWasHere has been on the forefront of building new businesses and audiences in today's ever-changing business landscape. Her work is a shining example, in my humble opinion, for women and women of color specifically to seize opportunity and to lead at every turn. And she's now also sharing her experiences with aspiring operators by launching her own programs under this Elevation Chief of Staff training banner. She's on a mission to demystify one of the fastest growing leadership roles in business by empowering others through her innovative Chief of Staff certification programs. She's very passionate about breaking down barriers. She is very dedicated to helping professionals excel in a role that she believes is pivotal, yet terribly, terribly misunderstood, which we're going to talk a lot about. And so with all that said, welcome, Melanie Jones. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. That was quite a mouthful. I I appreciate that intro.
Sometimes people say when they hear me read it, they're like, I want to meet that person. Like, I didn't even know that was me.
Yeah, sounds good.
Exactly. That is the culmination of you and your career and your life's work through my eyes, maybe, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
So, no, super excited to have you here. I'm fascinated for a few different reasons. Obviously, you have a long-standing relationship with another of my online, although I have met Arlan once in person, friends, Arlan Hamilton, which is a fascinating, obviously, journey, I'm sure, for you, as I can imagine, just the fascinating journey that she's been on. Arlan doesn't know this, but I'll quickly say just a little bit of context that ties us together is her way back in her origin story. Her podcast that she did about her journey was, I think, maybe like the third podcast I ever listened to.
Oh wow.
And it was I shouted out in this show because it was inspirational to me, along with the two other podcasts that I listened to when I began listening to podcasts a long, long time ago. That kind of inspired me to believe that, like, I really dig this kind of storytelling and I really dig human conversation. So maybe I'll do this.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool full circle moment. But I want to dive in and talk about what you're working on today and why it's so important and where it fits in the business landscape. And so I'm just going to drop in with the first question that does go back a little bit and talk about some more of your career context, because I think it informs how you got to where you are, and then also kind of why you believe that this is a path for lots of people. So to me, as I researched your history and kind of went back and prepped for the show, it has seemed to me that throughout your career journey, you've really always applied what I called kind of an entrepreneurial thinking mindset to your work, to your jobs. Like it doesn't seem to me you've ever been satisfied in your history to just do the job or to kind of just punch the clock. And so if that's true, I'd love for you to tell us why you think that you've always been this way. Or is this something that you kind of discovered maybe later or more recently in your career?
No, you're 100% right. I've never been satisfied to just check off the sort of bullet points on the job description. I've always been in positions where I get that done and then I'm like, okay, what else? What can we do? What's the next thing? Always having that sort of bigger vision for myself and for the role. But mostly it's been because I've been really fortunate to have supported leaders that I really believe in. And so it's just really like motivating, and I want to go above and beyond for them. And I want to sort of push further. And yeah, you hired me to do this, but you also need this done. You need that done. And so it just sort of that's really has been what's motivated me to sort of keep pushing further.
Are you a pretty naturally detail oriented person, or more like big thinker, or both?
I'm a little bit of both, which comes in handy when you are a chief of staff, because you have to have that ability to look at the details and to juggle the details, but also the strategic piece of thinking, how do all of these details play into the bigger picture?
Yeah.
How can we optimize the details so that they align with the strategy?
Yep.
So yeah, I've always been a combination of both and always been able to use that in what I do. Like you said, like the entrepreneurial piece of taking like, yeah, here's what I'm supposed to do, but what else can I do?
Yeah. No, I mean, and we could, granted, I'm out here in the world trying to convince everybody that the phrase entrepreneurial thinking is like a broader, more appropriate description of other words we've always used, right? So someone might say like, you're innovative thinker, or you were a forward thinker, right? All those things are true. I'm just kind of, I'm tired of the language that we use. So I'm trying to come up with some new phraseology. And I think you have been. And the reason I asked you the question about the detail versus big picture is because you said in there, like the example of like, okay, cool, boss, like this is the task you gave me. But by the way, I also noticed that we should do these three things. And so that tells me that you have that bit of strategic awareness, right? Where you're thinking ahead a few steps all the time. We're thinking on behalf of the people that the executives and the leaders that you're working with.
Yeah, definitely. And I do love how you've sort of reframed like innovative and forward thinking as entrepreneurial thinking, because a lot of times people get confused about like entrepreneurship. Does that mean, I have to have raised a fund or like, or raised around, or there's confusion around what an entrepreneur is. And I tell people all the time, if you've come up with something, if you've built something out of nothing, out of scratch, you've thought about how to create something new in the world, that's entrepreneurial thinking.
That's it. And you can use that. I give you, like, I'm sharing it with you in the world. Like that's the idea. Hey, I'm old enough to remember, you may not even remember this phrase. And it got used a lot in the last 10 years, like outside the US as emerging markets were trying to develop entrepreneurial economies. This intrapreneur, right? Like you were like an entrepreneur, but you had a corporate job. And no offense to all the good people that describe themselves that way over the last 20 years. I just always thought it was bullshit. Like I was like, that's just such a terrible word. I was like, you're just an employee who thinks, and I didn't say entrepreneurial thinking back then, but I would say like, you're just someone who thinks entrepreneurially. Like you're creative, you're outside the box, right? Like that's one of the like this entrepreneurial thinking branding for the podcast has actually been like a seed in my brain for 20 years. Because to your point, I think it's been too complicated. I would love for you, I talked about it in your bio, right? You've had your career arc as I looked back kind of through your various job postings and whatnot throughout your career. Although my career is much longer, I'm much older than you. I identified with it. I was like, yeah, like that's the progression. Like that's the like I did the same thing. More mine was more like strictly like business development and sales growth sides, but it was that like progression where you moved up the ladder and moved a little sideways, and sometimes got a. So tell us that story. Tell us how did your own career evolve from essentially staffer, right, inside of various departments to now CEO of and the right hand person for Arlan and her empire, and then now founder of your own.
Yeah, so I started as an executive assistant. I graduated college in 2008, which was right into like, oh, I forget what they called it, the Great
Yeah,
Recession, or
right. Boy, great timing.
not, not a great
Just
time.
take a summer year. That's a forced gap year, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I graduated then. I ended up getting married. Common thing in Dallas, Texas, we get married young. I got married, had my son, and kind of thought there was a point where I thought I would just like be a mom and kind of go down that path. But then some things happened, and I'm like, no, I want to get into the career world. And so executive assistant just sounded like something I could do. I knew I could do that. And so I got into being an executive assistant. From there, I was like, okay, well, project management, that's interesting. I can do that. Started looking into that more. I had a boss who needed a chief of staff and pulled me into that position. I had never heard of a chief of staff. I didn't know what they were, but it sounded cool. And I was like, yeah, I'll go with it. And so that was my first foray into the chief of staff world. Again, there's not a lot of resources. If you're in project management, there's a ton of training available, a ton of like study guides and coaching and things that you can do for a chief of staff that really definitely didn't exist at that time. I found I think some articles online on Medium or something, but I loved doing it. And I just, again, like what I tell people, it's a gap filler role. So you're just filling the gaps for your leader. Your leader has a vision. They have something they want to do in the world, but they don't have the bandwidth or ability to get it all done. And so you are the person who, whether it's tactically or strategically, you're getting it done. And so that was sort of that segment of my career. I got into some other things. And then when I started working with Arlan, it was so natural to be like, just, I'm your right hand person, like, let's just go, whatever it is you need, like, we're going to make it happen.
And like that in and of itself is an old school phrase. I mean, like that's a phrase I grew up with, like the right hand man or the right hand, the terribly sexist 1970s version of that in my dad's world would have been like the girl Friday, like which my dad would say like affectionately, like he meant it as a compliment to the person that he most trusted to help him run his businesses.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different, feelings and thoughts, especially like in the admin world around titles. And, for whatever it's worth, to me, it just always was important that I have a leader who I respect, I admire, I
Yeah.
align with their vision. What can I do to make it happen? And I'm just going to keep like pushing and chugging along and making it happen. So yeah, so that's how I've ended up in the roles. I left, worked for one of Arlan's portfolio companies, and then towards the end of last year, she was like, hey, 2024 is going to be crazy. I need you back.
Okay.
Because I had built that trust and that credibility and that relationship, but also she knew that I'm just an operator. I'm going to get things
Yeah.
done. And
Yeah.
so I came back at that point as her COO. And then we had Your First Million Live, incredible 2,000 person event in LA. And after that, it was, pulling that off, our first event, our first large scale event, um, pulling that off afterwards, she promoted me to her CEO.
She was like, "All right, you're the boss."
Yeah.
she's like, "I'm the talent. You're the like. Let's just do this because this is working."
Yeah, and it was kind of a conversation like that. She really, really enjoyed like being up there and teaching people and speaking and just having those interviews. We had Issa Rae and Rich Paul and Sheila Johnson
Yeah.
and Gary Vee, some incredible people. And so she just felt that's really where she shined, and she felt so confident and comfortable knowing that I was literally behind the scenes, making sure
Right.
everything was
Yeah.
happening and running. And so yeah, that's just sort of how it happened.
What have you? And this is sometimes is a tough question, so it's fair if you struggle with it or you're not comfortable with it. But like looking in the mirror of yourself, right? Like over the course of your career, not just this last couple of years, but like over the whole course, like what types of leadership qualities have you seen develop in yourself, or have you focused on developing? That you whether we want to talk about those are essential for success for everybody else, maybe we can talk about that in a minute, or more just focus on you. Like what leadership, like two or three leadership qualities that you've seen really emerge in yourself over the years?
I'd say, of course, there's sort of the standard ones, but the ones that have been most impactful for me and the ones I've been most intentional about developing as I saw how valuable they were, I'd say curiosity, wanting to learn more. And that
Okay.
is sometimes, as a leader, sometimes you think I've got to have all the answers. But the truth is, it's also very valuable to have all the right questions. So
Nice.
having that sort of idea of what are we not asking? What are we not thinking about? Like, what are we not considering? What's another way? Having those questions and having that curiosity, I think has been really key for me in a lot of areas of my life, including career. Another skill that's, I think, underestimated as a leadership quality is empathy and like the relationship building piece. So getting to know people and getting to understand what are their motivations, what are their hesitations, how do I, influence this person to get them aligned with where the company's heading. What sort of things should I be on the lookout for? If we implement this new thing, what is this team going to say? So having that sort of empathy and developing that skill of relationship building for,
That's huge.
it's great to have like the relationships on that level, but also as a leader, I think it's important that you, nurture that and build that up.
No, 100%. I would. He'll listen to this. I'm about to comment about somebody, but not by name, but he'll listen to this and he'll know I'm talking about him later. But I have a executive client that I did some coaching consulting work with the last few years here in the U.S. And he knows because we talk about this. Like his biggest struggle is he can see the tactical, he can see the plan, he can see he's very much an engineer's mind, so he can see like what needs to be done next and what that person should do next. But he just fundamentally lacks curious nature. He's just not a curious person. And I think those two that you bring up, I think they're kind of related because also, unfortunately, he's not a very empathetic person. He has a he so I and to your point, I use this story to illustrate what you're saying, right? As I think those two things work in concert with one another, right? Because if you're a more curious person, you're likely then more curiously empathetic. Like I think you tend to be more empathetic because you can place yourself into other spot or other shoes, as we used to say. So those are both huge.
And that's a really good point. I hadn't really considered the correlation there, but you're right. When you are like curious about why is this person behaving this way, curious about what are they going to think when we roll this thing out or when we make this change, having that curiosity about how is this going to affect them, asking those questions on that personal level. When you do value relationships and value people, it's like a win-win, right? Because you are caring about them, but it's also going to help the business be more successful when you've taken those things into consideration, when you've thought through them in
Yeah.
advance.
100% true. I'll tell you this too, a little bit of encouragement. We mentioned off air before we jumped on, you're going to scoot out of here at the end of the show because you're going to pick up your stepson. And I'll tell you that the leadership traits that you just mentioned, which are hugely critical for anybody, I believe, entrepreneurial thinker, executive, et cetera, are also just the foundations of good parenting.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Right. And I try in some client examples, I try occasionally to try and tap into like those similarities, or if I'm having a hard time helping someone to see the path in their business and what needs to be done, and I know that they're a parent and an active parent and I know something about their parenting, like I'll try and tie that back and show them the similarities. We did an episode which you'll love if you go back and listen to it, have the chance to in the coming days, with Robin Ward. Robin is an executive coach and investor here in Southern California. She's also an investor in Angel City FC, our NWSL women's football franchise here, which is wildly successful brand story. And she talks about it a lot. She's I won't say how old she is. She's mid-40s, and she decided to adopt as a single mom, and has a rider who's 4 years old. And we talked a lot about the parallels between like great leadership attributes and essentially just great human parenting attributes. So you're on the right path, Melanie. Like you're heading in the right direction, and I think you're by example, given some great advice. I want to pull two things apart from your broader experiences, and then we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about elevation really specifically. But I can't not ask you these next couple of questions because you're just so plugged into such a fascinating world, right? So two things. One, first and foremost, like through your work with Backstage, and then even like you said, you went to work for one of the portfolio companies, which I think I know which one it was, if I'm remembering correctly. And then now you're back and you have a more expanded role. So you and Arlan are literally kind of like, appendages from the same body in a lot of ways. And that means that one of the things I've always known about Backstage Capital and its universe, right, is that you guys are really purposeful about amplifying and elevating other people, right? Mm-hmm. And you're very purposeful in particular, right? Here we are, middle-aged old white dude, talking to someone who's doesn't look like me, didn't grow up like me, right? And both of you are so particular about creating access and creating opportunities and clearing pathways for people, and in the entrepreneurial world, and just in the kind of in the business world in general. I want you to talk about that a little bit, if you could. I want you to help us understand why it's so important for you to work so purposefully to expand access for women of color, both professionally and entrepreneurially.
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in a couple of things. One is that having a diversity of ideas is going to help, like with innovation and with growth. And so I do think that it's important to just open access for people with different viewpoints and different backgrounds and different experiences to bring what they have to the table. So just creating those sort of pathways is really important to me. I'm also I love the idea of representation matters. And so to me, I'm like, we need more people out there like the Arlan Hamiltons of the world who are showing that you can
and the Melanie Joneses of the world too.
Thank you. I'm starting to do a little bit more of putting myself in front of the scenes, but I'm most comfortable.
That you're here. Hey, you're here. Yeah. We're doing it right now. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, so just amplifying those, because I do believe representation matters. I want other people, I'm an African American woman. I want African American women to see that, or girls to see that, oh, she's in a operational leadership position, then I could be in an operational leadership position, and to see those things, right. I can be a venture capitalist, I can be an investor, I can be a founder, and to make it where it's not a one-off anymore, where it's just normalizing that. I think that's always been really important to me. And so, yeah, that's sort of, in previous organizations, completely, I've always had leaders that I love and adore, respect, admire, all the good things. But I do feel so much more motivated now in a position where I'm working for underestimated founders like Arlan, who, it's just very motivating for me to be able to.
You've mentioned alignment a couple of times, even from your first opening statement, right? The alignment with the leaders that you work for has seemingly, and you can see it in your face, you can hear it in your voice, it seems like it has taken your career up a notch.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's definitely been true. But so with earlier in my career, I did work for middle-aged white men, great people, amazing humans.
Some of us aren't bad.
Not bad at all. I seal of endorsement. But there is something for me, just being honest, I do feel wow, I'm just even more motivated to get this message out, because it's not just the one, thing that we're out here to do in the world. It's also the representation aspect of it. And there's the wider ripple effect. I've seen people who meet Arlan and they start crying because they're like, you inspired me. I heard about you when I was in college and I decided to go down this path. I, read your book. And so I've gone down this path. Yeah. And so that ripple effect is really important to me. And so that it's very much a motivation. Yeah, it's what gets me up and going.
I was going to say, it's something we all need, that thing that gets us fired up in the morning, right? To not just wake up, but to wake up and attack the day. All right. So last question, and then we're going to jump into everything elevation. And we're going to learn all about the chief of staff world, which I have some opinions on. So last question, and you kind of just tipped on it, but I want to unpack this slightly different way. Right. So you just said, I'm positioning myself a little bit more in front of I'll say in front of the camera, right? A little bit more out front and not always just the operator role. But you are the operator role. And so naturally the tendency is like, I'm most comfortable kind of behind the scenes, right? Outside of the spotlight. But yeah, living in this world that you now are operating and having pulled off, huge kudos to all of you, but obviously to you for your leadership, that event that you referred to, right? Which was here in Los Angeles. And I didn't even attend. And I'm not talking about like how I heard about it on social media, but there was like a buzz about town. I heard about it around town from various people and stuff, not even just seeing what was posted that you guys posted and all that, which is really cool. So in doing that and in putting her out there, in putting those other people out there, you appreciate like the value of storytelling, right? Yet it probably isn't like your first go-to thing to focus on for yourself. So I would love for you to kind of talk about like how you believe or maybe how you've come to learn like the ability to tell great stories, even in the case of like, I want to show the story or shine a light on the story of me as an African-American woman, right? So that others can be inspired by that. Like, explain to me, talk to me about your opinions or your feelings about like the importance of great storytelling as a mechanism to help businesses grow.
Yeah, well, it's so important, and I think again, like I said, I've always been more comfortable behind the scenes, but I did see, so specifically with Arlan, her, what is it? It's called like your personal brand. Her personal brand is so impactful, and so I've seen that over and over so much. When I decided that I wanted to bring my course into the world and provide this, because I'm so passionate about the chief of staff role, I'm so passionate about helping increase access to it and awareness about it. And so if I really believe in my product, then like I can't just build a course and like it's sitting, on Kajabi quietly off in a corner. If I really want to make a difference, then I have to get that story out. And so that is what helped me sort of overcome that hurdle of I don't want to be in front of the scenes, but like you said, the power of storytelling. If I say that I want to help people, I can't help people by like being quiet about it. I have to put it out there. I have to put myself out there and share that story. So that's and I talk to I coach people like on interview prep for chief of staff roles, and that comes up a lot. A lot of people who naturally are drawn to a chief of staff position, they are more of the behind the scenes operator types. And so I have to say, and they don't like to sell themselves. They're happy selling and putting shine on their executive or whatever. So I have to tell them, hey, if you want the opportunity to support this person, you first have to like promote yourself. You have to put yourself out there and you have to tell the story of why you are uniquely positioned to support them. And then you can, continue to like support and lead from the back and all of that.
Yeah.
But the storytelling piece is important.
That's powerful wisdom right there that you share, right? Because the tendency, especially now, like, and going forward, like in this, like, call it kind of media saturated world where, every guy like me and every person like Arlan has a podcast and a thing and a this and a course and an event. And like, it's just, everybody could fall into the misperception that like, well, I'm not one of those people. I'm not that outgoing or that extroverted or that confident in my communication skills. So I'm not a storyteller. But you raised the real point when you're at the pure operational level of helping people to prepare themselves for job interviews, in your case for chief of staff roles, but it could have been for anything, right? Like your point is probably the most important lesson should be like a college course, right? Is just like, hey, we're going to help you prepare to understand that you have to become comfortable and eventually then become good at telling your own story. With all of its coolness and nuance, because you're number one of 8 billion in the planet. There's no one else like Melanie Jones, exactly, and so that's a powerful story to tell. So that's pretty cool. I was curious, kind of what you thought about it, because you're the behind the scenes person that's been thrust into this kind of spotlight type company, but I love that your real appreciation comes from its application inside of your own universe of like having to just sell yourself to the next up job and the next executive that you're going to work with to earn the opportunity. I love the way you said that. Like, hey, if you want the opportunity to help support that person, like you're going to have to sell yourself to that person. And the only way to do that is tell the story. So with that, now let's tell the story about Elevation Chief of Staff Training. like, let's go back. Let's do the origin story. Like, how did you come up with this? And then tell us the commercial version. Like, what is it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I've, been in this chief of staff position early in my career, middle career, all of those times, and there's never really been great resources. There's a couple books, there's things you can find online, but there aren't a lot of resources. And so when I looked back at how impactful that role was for me, how pivotal it was for my career, I just felt like I really want to help other people get into this role. And of course, I always get, well, what is a chief of staff?
I was,
So
I was just going to say, because that in and of itself is like up for debate, right? So lots of people have, well, chief of staff is this, and or people say chief of staff, but they really just mean this, or.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? I can make a difference by coming in and building out the resources that I wish I had. And that's something also, just of course, working with Arlan, she's a big proponent of that, turning your knowledge into a service that can help other people,
Yeah.
a product that can help other people. Looking back on what do I wish I had, that's like, what is it? Necessity is the mother of all invention.
Right.
Like, I really wish there were challenges I faced in my chief of staff roles. There were a lot of like pitfalls, and there was some friction and different points. And when I looked back at what do I wish I had access to, that's what I went ahead and created. And then also, of course, Arlan is very big on like creating online courses. And so I had that sort of blueprint of like, okay, so this is how it could be done. So yeah, and then it also, part of it is like the chief of staff role, you don't have to be certified to be a chief of staff. That's not a requirement. But I noticed that gives people confidence when they feel like, okay, I've taken this course, like I know what's really expected. And it covers all of the like the foundational stuff of the role. So like whether you're a chief of staff here, there, wherever, like you have the foundation, you can feel confident stepping into it, even with all of its ambiguity.
Yeah.
But also like a hiring manager can see that you've, gotten to a certain level,
Right.
You've passed a standard, and that you've gone above and beyond. So you're really committed to the profession. And so there's a couple reasons why I felt that instead of just doing a course, making it a certification.
That's fascinating. And as I was listening to you describe it, and as I was reading through the materials before the show, I thought to myself, like there could be like a kind of a B2B angle to this at some point down the line, right? Where all of a sudden, like the company is benefiting from like, hey, we're going to provide your executives level team with access to like certified chief of staff roles that understand that the role is this, that have like, because again, you even used the word, right? Ambiguity. There's so much. I mean, my lesson, I have a couple of great friends that are chiefs of staff in one was in venture, one was in private equity. And they couldn't have been two completely different experiences. Right. And the one, she and I've had long conversations. She would be like my chief of staff reference point before meeting you. Because the conversations are always wrapped around like, okay, so you're going to interview for another chief of staff role at this other fund or firm. Like, do these guys have any idea what they actually want out of this role? Right. So it was that ambiguity is so prominent. And frankly, I don't even think mostly from the person's positional view as it is from the organizational view. So at some point, right, if you through the elevation training certification programming start to create some kind of consistency of definitions and language, that could be hugely valuable just to industry as a whole, right? To hiring managers, as you said.
Yeah, and that's definitely one sort of pathway for it. But what I kind of enjoy the ambiguity. I like the fact that it is sort of like a create your own career.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of that is like, as much as it can sound scary and overwhelming, when it's handled correctly, which is like something I include in the course, like here's what you need to do your first 30, 60, 90 days to get like really clear alignment around expectations, what's expected of you, where you can step in. But the cool thing about it is like I call it a gap filler. And like you come in and if you have strengths and like your strength is in, well, let me break it down a lot of people say this, but like chief of staff, it's COS, culture, operations, strategy. And so,
I was going to ask you, you just jumped to the next question I was going to ask, right? So like break it down, explain to us that don't know, or people that are listening that aren't sure, like explain literally in today's world, like, what is it? Like, what is it? What is it? And maybe what does it mostly do?
Yeah, so it is the best way I can describe this, and I should practice this
That's okay.
spiel since I'm asked. But the best way to describe it is that you are the CEO or the executive's right hand person, because sometimes, other executives have chiefs of staff. You're their right hand person helping to make their vision a reality.
Yeah.
And so,
And what was the COS that you said?
so that's just sort of like colloquial, but like culture, operations, strategy.
That's big though. That's like
Yeah.
super. That's defining for me. Like that helps me understand. Okay. These are the areas that this person brings that kind of catch-all right hand mentality to.
Yeah, 100%. So when you're a chief of staff, you're making sure that the culture, the ops, and the strategy are all aligned and like moving forward, right? Because the CEO, they need to be doing storytelling, they need to be doing the fundraising, they need to be like plotting that vision, and you're making sure everyone's headed that way. And so, like, again, how I was saying, the ambiguity is actually a really cool thing because you can bring your unique strengths and you can see like where a CEO needs you. Sometimes there's a CEO who is like, I cannot tell stories. Like, I'm a technical founder and I can't tell stories and I need a chief of staff. My right hand person is going to be someone who can handle communications for me, who can handle the relationship building and be my external liaison because I don't like going to these networking events. And that might be where your like a chief of staff shines in that role. In another role, they might be like, no, I need someone who can research. Like, I'm doing all of this and I need someone who's just going to like dig into the research for me because I don't have time for that. And so that's where you fit in
I
as chief
like
of
that.
staff. So it is true that it's very ambiguous and that can be viewed as a
You think that's a strength organizationally is the
exactly.
ambiguity. Yeah.
Exactly.
One of the lessons I hear you saying is in between the lines is kind of like, and boy, I wish I would have known this when I was talking to my friend a year ago. Right? It's like not every chief of staff role might be for you
Exactly.
because of who you are and what you bring. So like it just so happened that you and Arlan were a good fit for each other and missionally for what the organization needed. But the truth is, you could have been like very similarly skilled peoples and therefore not been a good fit. And then that it's not to say that you wouldn't be a good chief of staff. It's just that you weren't a good fit for that chief of staff role within that organization or with that leader.
Yep, you're totally right there. And again, like I said,
Interesting.
I do interview coaching with chiefs of staff, and sometimes they're like, "Yeah, I just apply to every, the spray and pray technique," and I'm always like, "Do you want to be a chief of staff there? Do you like? Let's say you did get the
Right.
job, would you want to be doing that?" Like, but you are right. There does need to be a little bit more, just like universal awareness of what the role is because you can't just like copy and paste someone else's chief of staff job description for your
Right.
company if that's not really what you need. And so getting that
But
clarity
that
around
that 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 in and of itself is interesting. And maybe go back to my prior point. And by the way, it's your business, not mine. It's not my place to tell you this stuff. But like that idea that maybe there's the value for on the organizational side is hey, we can help you as an organization, your HR people, your hiring people, your executives. We can help you better define
yeah
how a chief of staff role could be hugely impactful in your company.
yeah
And oh, by the way, then once you go through those exercises that we will teach you on how to define it, then when you're ready to, you think you're organizationally ready to hire and engage a chief of staff or multiple chiefs of staff for different people. Oh, by the way, we have this huge pool of them over here.
yeah I mean that's brilliant, and that I could definitely see that down the line. um but yeah,
Yeah,
that's
because that's where the ambiguity is problematic. It's not on the individual side. That's a positive. It's on the organizational side from the way you describe it, where they don't know and they try and copy and paste this other job description from someone else, and then it's like, well, that's not what I wanted. You
yeah
know?
and then you get into the role and they're like, well, my buddy had a chief of staff who really helped them with financial modeling, and like that's what I wanted from
Mm-hmm.
you. Well, that's not my strength, like
Right. And why didn't you put that in the job description? Right? Like
exactly, yeah. So
that's
it's not
fascinating.
just like this idea. But even that being the case with so much ambiguity, I did design the course like intentionally knowing that and having an awareness of that. So it does cover the basics of like there's a data analysis lesson, there's a financial acumen lesson,
Awesome.
because it is important that you do, even if those aren't the things that you're going to be focused on as a chief of staff. It's important, like what are the acronyms that you're hearing thrown around in a board meeting, and what are these
Yeah.
financial statements, what do they mean, and how can you use data to make more effective decisions.
That's terrific. Some foundational operational skills that would help anybody be better prepared for that role or for just frankly any career role. So that's awesome. Before we jump ahead, a couple more questions about it, but one, let's just make sure you do something as well. So give us literally like the commercial. So where can we find it? How can people log on? And if they were interested, how can people sign up for it? Like give us the basics, the advertisement, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. So you can go to elevationchiefofstaff.com. And
that's talk about a mouthful. There we go. That's easy to remember though. That's a great domain name, elevationchiefofstaff.com. I bet nobody else had that one.
Yeah, worked out for me. So go there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk to people. My DMs are full of just people, and it brings me so much joy. I really love like illuminating these things and answering questions. So 100% feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. I'm Melanie Jones TX. The little Texas shout out there.
There you go. Yeah, Texas girl. And so if they go to the website, literally they can learn everything about the course, and then also sign up for the course or buy the course or whatever.
Yeah, they can register for the course. It's self-paced, and I have weekly office hours. Tried doing the cohort thing at first, but there was just people were watching the recordings anyways, and people need that flexibility. Yeah. So it's all self-paced with office hours, so you can check in and have live conversations.
And when did you start? Like, how long has this been a thing? When did you start offering this?
So I started towards the beginning of the year. I had piloted it some last year, and then publicly, like this spring, sort of like after we got done with Your First Million Live, was like, okay, I'm ready to put this out into the world. Got that one baby pushed out into the world. Now I'm gonna bring my own baby.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Good for you. And again, like you've said a couple of times, you got a great teacher in your boss / partner in crime and all these things. So that's awesome. Curious question, like in the last two before we get into our last segment questions here and wrap up. So you can go pick up your son. But I'm curious, like the business world is changing so rapidly, right? And especially post-pandemic, I keep saying we're in kind of like this intermission. If this was a play, we're in like this kind of 4 or 5 year intermission period where everything is up for debate and everything can be changed and everything is going to come out kind of slightly different when we go forward over the next 50, 75 years. So considering that, like how quickly businesses are changing, how quickly, people like myself can say, I'm going to launch a media company, or Arlan can go like, I'm launching this and I'm launching that and I'm launching this, and really doing a lot of it in the early days kind of by herself, right? Like, so in that business world where it's not just big fat corporations with huge offices and lots of, staff layers, how do you see the chief of staff role evolving over, they say, the next, 3 or 4 or 5 years into that kind of evolving business world? Like where do we see it gaining the most traction?
So I think it's going to only become even more important because, like you said, there's going to be a lot of founders and CEOs starting their own things. We're not working for like the giant, massive corporation. So as people are becoming more entrepreneurial and starting their own things, they only have so much bandwidth, right? And so having that right-hand person, that person who can make their vision a reality and execute for them while they're doing all the other things they need to do as a founder, as a CEO, that's going to become even more vital. So that's just how I see. I see more and more founders realizing that they need a chief of staff. So I've actually got a little YouTube series, or not little, sorry, I shouldn't say that. I've got a YouTube series that I started.
I do the same thing. This is this little podcast of mine, which we're on like episode 130.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm only on episode 5, so.
Yeah, no, I do that, but that like 5 was just the same. Like you're right. We got to stop saying little. Like we got to stop doing that to ourselves, right?
Yeah, but so 2 of my guests, I was really surprised to find they were brought on as the first hire, or so one of them.
See that? I could see that.
Yeah. So one of them was with an AI company. Actually, I guess they're both technically AI companies. But anyways, so the founders were technical and brought them on as like, I need an operator. What I like to say, I love saying this, I need to like coin it at some time. But so the CEO makes it up, the chief of staff makes it real, and then you find a team that's going to make it recurring. And so that is such a like crucial point where chiefs of staff can make an impact, right? Because the the CEO, they have all these amazing visions, but they can't be the ones executing all of it. They can't be the ones like facilitating with all of the teams to make sure everything's on track and milestones are being hit. So that's where the chief of staff can really have an impact. And it's especially important in startups where like you just have to go, and like having that role be ambiguous to where like you're doing something new every day. You've got to be comfortable with that, but also that's needed. Like for a startup, you can't, like you're not going to have like an HR person, so me or a recruiter. You need your chief of staff. Hey, we got to hire a new PM. Like, can you do the recruiting process? And like, so that's again that gap filler nature of the role, just filling in. And I think, like I said, the role is growing so fast as people are sharing. Like, my chief of staff was so helpful for me, and people are like, "Oh, I need a chief of staff." Sometimes,
Right. No, I think it's an obvious. I think it's always been there. Frankly, like I think it's a role that I can think of too. They both happen to be women, trusted right hand people of mine over the course of my long career and a couple different companies. And now in this 2020s world, I would have referred to them as chiefs of staff. But they weren't. They were various titles, right, that fit whatever the culture was at the time. But that's fascinating. I think it's also important, as you say, right? We're in this world. We'll cheaply use my phrase, right? We're in this world where more and more entrepreneurial thinkers are going to be spun out into, even if they do have a day job, they're also going to have, as my daughter, who's a little bit younger than you and is a writer here in Hollywood, always says, she's like, yeah, Dad, like everybody our age, like has a portfolio.
yeah.
Career. Like our career is just a combination of a series of different things that we're working on. Like we're gone are the days of like, I worked for one big, huge corporation for a period of time and then another one. And then, yeah, exactly. And so I what I hear you saying through my own lenses, is that as more and more people are thrust out into this more entrepreneurial thinking, professional lifestyle, and they're building up more of their own things, to generate their income streams, that valuable role of that trusted right-hand person with that operational foundation, which we're defining as a chief of staff, will be even more in demand.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
It's exciting. It's a good time to do a training course for this. Awesome. Good job. All right. So we've told, I was going to ask you a different question, but we've told them all where to go. They need to go to the website, elevationchiefofstaff.com, so that they can check that out and they can learn everything they need to know. And if they have more questions, then they can contact you and talk to you about it and learn even more that way. But it seems like that's the answer to the question on like, what should someone who's interested in this role do next? So let's talk about something else, which let's go back to broad Melanie, the professional, again for a second as we close up. In this closing segment, I always like to make it a little bit more actionable so people can kind of take them like, that was my takeaway. Like that's something I can go apply next week to my own life. And in your case, I want to elevate back up from the chief of staff training role thing and just talk about just the idea of maybe 2 or 3 habits or mindset shifts or mindset decisions that we make, that anyone who's listening can use to elevate their own impact in their own current role. Like and it's almost back to that first question I asked you, right? Where it was like, I just sense that you've always been the person, no matter what your job was post-college, you've always been the person that hasn't just checked the box and done the job. Like you've always, so if that's true, which you've obviously now shown us that it is, and obviously there are lots of other people out there that are like you, right? Who like to show up to work and do more, who want to be valued. What would be 2 or 3 habits or skills that they should focus on developing in themselves, so that they can have that extra level of impact in their current job? Maybe that helps them get a promotion or inspires them to start their own thing. But for right now, like how can we help people to just be successful or more impactful at their current job?
I think the biggest thing goes back to, like we sort of touched on, is the curiosity. So start being more curious about what you're doing and the why behind it. In any role that you're in, unless you are like the CEO who's created the why, and even them, they sometimes forget. Get back to like, what is the why, but also where are we going? And having that focus in every single thing that you do. Where are we going? So here's where I am right now. Here's where I want to be. And then everything becomes focused on how do I bridge that gap? And so personally with your own like career path individually, but also your organization. And that's how you're going to bring so much value. And then other people will see that. They'll start to see that. So get that alignment around like where are we going? So it's so easy to get caught in the trap of like, I'm just working, I'm just doing like whatever task is on my desk,
Right.
that's what I'm doing. I'm responding to this email. It's so easy to get caught up in that. But take a step back. I always tell people like set aside time for ideation. Start just like literal block time in your calendar just to think, start thinking.
Because you were that way when you were an account manager, when you were a project manager, when you were an executive assistant, and yes, when you later became a chief of staff, a COO, et cetera. Like when you were an account manager at one of those big companies you worked for early in your career, like you were stopping yourself to say like, why am I doing this? Not like, whoa, why am I doing this? But like, why am I doing this? Like why do I have to like do this project management stuff that I'm doing? Why these tasks? Why do these matter to the product that's going out the door that my salesman is complaining about?
Yeah. So when you get down to that why, it's usually going to be something that you find at least a kernel of motivation in, right? Because most companies were founded for some mission. They want to accomplish something in the world, and that's why they started. And it's easy to drift apart from that and feel like a cog in the wheel and just go and do your stuff. When you get down to that why and down to that root, it's going to like reinvigorate your sort of mission. So like for instance, I worked for a dental company, and I always say like corporate dentistry, like it sounds like the most boring thing, but I just fell in love with it. I'm like, and we can like expand and we can provide like services to people in rural areas who don't have access. Like it fired me up because I looked at it through that lens. I got curious about what are we really trying to accomplish? Like where it's not just about making money. Making money is great, but there's something deeper and at least foundational, which was expanding core practices. And so that was the case in corporate dentistry. Um, but that when you start asking those questions, when you start getting curious, you're going to get motivated. And then you're going to start to see, okay, so if that's where we're heading, what can I do? How can I contribute to that? How can I get us there faster? How can I make sure we stay on track to head that way and make sure that what I'm doing, I know we don't have a ton of time, but I want to throw out a story.
No, we're
I just
fine.
remembered the story of, oh, I'm gonna mess it up, but maybe you'll find it or something. But
It's okay. We'll figure it out.
these guys are like building a wall or like a
Okay.
building. They're laying bricks
Okay.
for a building, and so someone drives
Yeah.
by and they're like, "What are you guys building?" And they're like, "I don't know. I'm just putting a brick. I'm just like laying bricks." And then they're like not that excited, right? But then one of the construction managers is telling his team that's on the other side, like, we're building this huge like cathedral and it's going to be like amazing and magnificent. And those people are like so excited because they're contributing to something.
Same team,
Exactly.
just different
They're
points of
doing the
view.
same thing. They're laying bricks. But these
I
people
love
who
that.
know the why, like we're building this amazing cathedral, it's going to be like a tourist district,
Right.
all these amazing things are going to happen here. They're excited.
Versus just the I'm a bricklayer.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm not a brick like so some guy wakes up and he says I'm a bricklayer, right? Somebody else wakes up and goes, I'm laying bricks on what's gonna be the most amazing, beautiful cathedral in the history of mankind. And I get excited about going to
Exactly.
do that every day.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Like curiosity, I heard curiosity, attaching to the why, right? Asking
Mhm.
yourself the why of the various things, and then thinking about the third thing, thinking about then how you can apply your skills
Yeah.
and your work on a daily basis to serve that why and to essentially address the curiosity organizationally. That's fantastic. Very specific advice. It's been a pleasure. You have proved 100%, 10 times over exactly what I thought via our online social relationship, which is that you are ultimately an entrepreneurial thinker.
Thank you.
A
I'm
hundred
glad to get
percent,
that seal of
obviously.
approval. Thank you.
Yeah, right. I mean, I may need your help in the coming year to figure out how to do the entrepreneurial thinker certification training program,
Perfect.
right? But no, I mean that like you're the I say this not facetiously at all. Like you are the epitome of it, right? Like you're a talented, creative, again, curious, empathetic woman who just happens to be a woman of color, right? Who but then takes that as part of her responsibility to say like I can be an example, I can be a light. But you're a light inside of just that starts because you're just a light inside of your own jobs that you've always had, right? And then that eventually earns you the visibility from others that are maybe beyond your scope or outside your field of vision, right? Who then see that in you and then they want to bring that along because everybody wants to have a Melanie Jones next to them
No,
when they're doing because the hard stuff that we're doing is hard stuff, right? And it is made possible. I love that the CEO thinks about it, and then the this, and then the this, like that layering of just kind of how things actually get
Yeah.
built. Has to have people like you in it, and ultimately you have to be an entrepreneurial thinker. You can't just be a job doer. You can't just be a check the boxer.
Yeah.
Good for you. This is an absolute. This is, hey, selfishly, this is an absolute pleasure for me.
Thank you. Same.
Thank you so much for. Yeah, thanks for spending some time with us. We know we got to get you out of here real quick. We mentioned how people can find you on LinkedIn. Let's do it again. Just how people can find you on social in case.
Yeah. So linkedin.com/in/Melanie Jones TX. It's MELANIE. And yeah, find me, DM me.
Awesome.
Always happy to help.
That's great. And we know we've said the course name a few times. We'll put all the stuff in the show notes so people can check it out and find it. And if anybody who's listening or watching when we drop the YouTube version wants to connect with Melanie and has a hard time doing it, just check with us and we'll get there. But this is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. You know, we can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, like, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.